morning, or buenas noches, Micronesia. Sorry, I'm a little, my mind is somewhere else or something. My name is Troy Torres with Candid News. Welcome to our studios here in Hagåtña on this beautiful Saturday that was on Guam. It was hot AF throughout the day, but we managed to get some. I'm so off my game tonight. I'm so sorry. I'm so stupid. Bear with me. We have a lot of news to bring to you. Holy fuck. So we're going to start with our first story. And it's a story that we wanted to bring to you because of the another story that we're going to talk about a little further down in the news. And it is the story of Manjo Quintanilla. It reminded us of another story that happened not too long ago, just about 3 years ago, when Professor Michael Ehlert, a psychology professor from the University of Guam, went to trial. Pardon me, I think he went to trial in 2016, or went to trial in 2017, and he was convicted of criminal sexual conduct against young women at the University of Guam. And it all started in 2013 and 2014 when the accusations came out that when two women reported him to the Guam Police Department for unwanted sexual advances that happened off campus. The reason that this case for us has some striking resemblance to the Manjo Quintanilla case has less to do with the story itself and more to do with the cover-up and with those who were in positions of power to do something about it and did not do something about it. And as we may see in the Manjo Quintanilla case, actually went through some lengths to prohibit the sexual offender from being held to account for his crimes. So if we can all recall the case of Professor Michael Ehlert, who was accused of being basically a serial predator, a serial rapist. Over the course of some 20 years as a professor, or some 20 semesters or something as a professor, having free reign in his classroom, in his union-protected job at the University of Guam, over his students, he would throw parties at his house and at other places, and the guests of honor would be his young female students. And there were reports back in 2013 and 2014 prior to these two women filing police reports that not just these two, but over a handful of women tried to get the university's attention about what Professor Michael Ehlert was doing. And the university's response to these women after getting the runaround was to provide them psychological services within the Department of Psychology, which was run by, well, the same people who were covering up for their buddy, Dr. Mike Ehlert, who included Ian Twaddle and, gosh, I can't remember the name of the other person. I'll get that to you later. But these professors, it was like leading the fox, or leading the fox into the henhouse. These girls who had been sexually assaulted and had complained to several people throughout the university about, and for them to do something about this, they were sent to receive psychological services within the same division, controlled by the same person who had sexually assaulted them. This was our first Manjo Quintanilla story. It was this Mike Ehlert case. Now the story gets worse. The reason these two women were made to file police reports was because the university, under the leadership of several people who could have done something about it, did not, and treated these women as though they were pariahs to the university and to the university's reputation. They did not treat them as victims or survivors. They treated them as people who were a burden to the university. And then when more people started to come forward, they were treated with the complete silence of the university, while everyone from the president of the university to the president or the chairman of the faculty union at that time, Dr. Don Platt, to the president of the faculty senate, Dr. Kate Moots, and I believe her successor, Dr. Don Rubenstein, to the, at the time, the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, Dr. James Selman, had all stood up for Dr. Mike Ellert and said he was an upstanding citizen, that he was a great professor, and that these allegations could not be true before any investigation had even concluded in this case. The leaders of the university were standing up for this guy who was accused of criminal sexual conduct against several students. And the going theory at the time was that because these students were over the age of 18, how could there be any criminal sexual conduct if none of the women said no, though a couple of the women did come forward and say that they refused his advances and he still advanced. Well, the same sort of thing is coming up in the case that will bring you a couple stories down of Manjo Quintanilla, because the girl who committed suicide at the time was 18 years old. The court system has since recognized that when you're a teacher, even of, especially in a school, well, if you're a teacher in a school setting, and if you have, if you engage in sexual relations with a student who is under your ward, you very well could be charged and convicted of criminal sexual conduct, because the nature of the crime and the commission of the crime match up. The nature of a sex crime is one who is of the predator who exerts his dominion over the other person, dominates the other person. It's not a matter of sex, it's a matter of power. And in a classroom setting, a teacher has that power. A teacher is in control of the classroom. So when a teacher exerts his power in a way that subdues the student into sexual acts, it's just the same thing as criminal sexual conduct, the same thing as rape. And the courts ruled that in the conviction of Dr. Ellert. Now, before the conviction happened, even more happened before the conviction happened, and it was in an effort to silence the whistleblower in the case. It was Dr. Ron McNinch, who was a professor with, or who is a professor with the College of Professional Studies in the School of Business and Public Administration. Dr. McNinch, for some time, was the only person who stood up for those students. When he had heard about the case, he was also a member of the faculty senate, to which Dr. Kate Moots was the president, and Dr. Don Rubenstein was an officer, and I believe he succeeded her as the president of the faculty senate, and another person named Dr. Vivian, I don't know how to say her name. I think it's really Dames, but she tells people Dames because she's pretty pretentious. And she's like one of those fake people, you know. I remember her when I was at UOG. She was always just a fucking bitch, you know. And so this is my way of saying buenas, Dr. Vivian Dames. So Dr. Vivian Dames also was involved in this effort to make Dr. Mike Ellert look like an angel and to malign those who were on a campaign, were on a mission to stamp out sexual abuse at the University of Guam by taking the proper courses of action in the Ellert case and by reforming the university's sex abuse policies, which the faculty senate and the faculty union were near completely against. Because Dr. McNinch blew the whistle on what was happening with Dr. Ellert, and he did this for 2 or 3 years. This man waged this campaign against the injustice perpetrated by the University of Guam, basically on these students. He called out the university's lack of response, lack of urgency in responding to these students who were reporting things internally. He called out the lack of concern and care that the university gave to these students when they did not offer any services, but the services of the very conflicted psychological department within the University of Guam. And then he called out, after Dr. Ellert had been issued adverse action, but only after months and months of these women and Dr. McNinch fighting this system, the University of Guam had no choice but to issue adverse action against Dr. Mike Ellert. And for criminal sexual conduct against these women, they sentenced him to leave without pay during the summer months. Well, it gets better, or worse. What Dr. McNinch was able to find out was that that was no punishment at all, because Dr. Ellert didn't work during the summer months, and he was on one of those teacher pay schedules where he had already been paid. It's the, what do they call it, the 10-month calendar or whatever it is. Dr. Mike Ellert, during that year where he received this so-called leave without pay during the summer months, ended up making the same amount of money that he would have made without that decision, because the summer months weren't included. And he wasn't going to teach anyway. So there was no punishment exerted on Dr. Mike Ellert. Nothing was done, except that as part of his record, this adverse action was served. He didn't lose his job. He wasn't removed from the university. According to Dr. Robert Underwood, who was the president at the time, he was immediately removed from the classroom, though that's not necessarily true. He wasn't immediately removed from the classroom. And when he was removed from the classroom, it was summertime. He wasn't going to be in the classroom anymore. But they allowed him to draw this paycheck the entire time. And it wasn't until Dr. Mike Ellert was convicted by a jury panel in the Superior Court of Guam that they did anything about this case. Meanwhile, what was happening in between this time frame was that the university's faculty senate and faculty union were doing everything possible to sanction Dr. Ron McNinch, to silence him for speaking up, because he came out and he said, there are so many issues here that violate the people's and the students' trust in the University of Guam. And what's worse is it has placed these women in significant harm and placed the university at significant risk for financial liability. It exposed the university. And also, it exposed the university to several violations of federal Title IX and Title, I believe it's 16, which very clearly lay out how universities and colleges and campuses throughout the nation are to address sex abuse on campuses. They call it the McCleary Acts. Dr. Ron McNinch, in very detailed letters to the university president and the university community, complained about these things and said, we got to do a better job. We got to do a better job at all of this, and we have to improve this system, and we have to come up with new and better policies that are updated for this day and age. And rather than listening to what he had to say prior to the conviction of Dr. Ellert, Dr. McNinch faced a very terse faculty senate sanction by Dr. Don Rubenstein, supported by Dr. Vivian Dames, and a complaint filed by the faculty union chairman at the time, Dr. Donald Platt, who accused Dr. McNinch of violating the university's complaint process or reporting process, which was a ridiculous assertion, because this guy was trying to get information out to everybody who needed to have the information. He was trying to avoid the cover-up. But Dr. Platt used the university's antiquated rules at the time to say that Dr. McNinch was violating these rules. And what's worse is that the president of the university at the time agreed with the faculty union and forwarded whatever investigation they had to the Office of the Attorney General so that the Office of the Attorney General inspectors could determine whether Dr. McNinch violated any laws when he was trying to report violations of the law, not just to the university community, but to senators, to the Office of the Attorney General itself, and to federal officials. And so after that, Dr. McNinch files an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission claim where he had had enough and said that the university and its entire leadership was retaliating completely against him, all for doing what was right in the interests of those two women who filed those police reports and the other women who tried to get their complaints heard at the university level, but they gave up because the university was not supporting them and did not seem to care about what they were going through and the harm that they had gone through as a result of Dr. Mike Ellert. And so what Dr. McNinch, after all of this, his concern after Dr. Ellert was convicted was that what had transpired between 2014 and 2017 was that there was a chilling effect at the University of Guam, meaning what the university did scared other people from coming forward to make claims against professors who might be abusing them, because they saw how the system worked and how the system was so corrupted toward politically in the know faculty members at the University of Guam, most of whom are within the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. And this wasn't the first time that an issue like this, where the faculty union has protected its own in a very political and dastardly way, has come up. This has been an issue at the University of Guam for many, many years. And Dr. Vivian Donmas, Dr. Don Rubenstein, Dr. Don Platt, they're all involved in this. Dr. James Selman, they've all been involved in these political affairs over at the University of Guam. But why this is so important, this subject about Dr. Ellert and the cover-up that happened at UOG is so important to current events, is because that chilling effect seems to have bled in to, the university's neighbor, George Washington High School, where people who should have known didn't make reports. People who did know did make reports and were shunned. People who did know and wanted to make reports were scared because of the power of Linda Hernandez Avila, the principal of George Washington High School. I'm sorry, Chelo, I know I said our lineup would be Ellert, then Zion, then GW, but I'm gonna switch it up and go into GW now. Is that okay? Sure. Okay, so let's talk about GW now. For several months, the George Washington High School community, I'm not saying everybody, but those who should have been in the know, were aware of the sexual deviance of one of its teachers, a very highly paid assistant JROTC instructor named Manjo Quintanilla, who was allegedly having, on top of having a wife who works there, a girlfriend who works there, he had sexual liaisons with several women who work in the school as well. But I guess he didn't have enough with that, so he started having sexual relations with students, with female students within the school. One of whom was, by the time of her death, an 18-year-old woman named Samantha Williamson. And prior to her death, there was a male victim. Not necessarily, not to our knowledge, not of the sexual deviance of Manjo Quintanilla, but it was Samantha Williamson's boyfriend, who died November 30, 2018, of suicide. So that happened in November 30, 2018. That's about 6 months ago. Coincidentally, the same time frame as the rape of the 12-year-old girl at Mount Carmel School, and I'll get to that, and what junglewatch.info has to say about some striking similarities and contrasts between the Mount Carmel and the George Washington case. But at the time of the boyfriend, Dominic Taitano's death, uh, faculty members at George Washington High School describe him as a kind boy, a good boy, who was very much into ROTC, who would walk into the ROTC office with a smile, and then one day he was gone. Just such a sad and disturbing thing, and nobody could figure it out. But then several months later, in March of this year, his girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time, Samantha Williamson, commits suicide as well. And she allegedly left behind a note, a suicide note, where she implicates Manjo Kintanita as being a person she was supposedly in some kind of sexual relationship with. Now, whether or not the unborn baby was as a result of this sexual relationship, we're not sure. We don't know that, and that would all just be speculation right now. But what is clear is that he had a very inappropriate and illegal relationship with Samantha Williamson. And if investigators, and we have not received word from the Guam Police Department whether this is something that GPD is investigating, whether the administrative investigation by DOE into Manjo Kintanita has been forwarded, or any part of any report has been forwarded to GPD for GPD's investigation into any criminal matters. But what Candid understands is that if this note exists and she implicated Manjo Kintanita as having a sexual relationship with her, and if it can be proven that the reason that her boyfriend killed himself a few months prior was because of this relationship, there are cases throughout the country of similar things that end in the charging and conviction of these teachers in homicides. So that's really what it is. And like the Ellert case, despite Samantha Williamson's age, despite her being at the age of majority, she was a student. He was a teacher. Not only is a relationship between the two of them inappropriate, but according to the Ellert case, it's illegal. You can go to jail for that. What makes it much worse are the allegations that the school principal knew about this for a certain time way past the reporting requirement that she should have had, or that she should have honored, to make a report to Child Protective Services and to the Guam Police Department. And apparently none of that happened. And none of that happened, and that's the reason that Linda Hernandez Avila, the principal, was removed from her position at George Washington. And it's about time. It really is about time that that idiot of a woman would be removed from that position, because she's just been an idiot for such a long time. But we wanted to put names to these two people who we're talking about, because number one, they can no longer be harmed because they unfortunately have died. Number two, to memorialize them as people who had promising futures that ended as a result of the deviance of a teacher and a predator who has been on the GW campus preying on students. And whatever he's done with faculty members or staffers there, that's a whole other matter that can be addressed in a far less urgent way. But his preying upon students is quite a different thing and requires the urgency of the Department of Education, which that story is receiving, or that case is receiving, apparently because, as you may have seen in the interview we had yesterday with Superintendent John Fernandez, it's something that's happening. DOE is taking this very seriously, and an investigation seems to be wrapping up administratively, and we'll see how that leads into a criminal investigation if there is to be one. Now, we also asked GPD, the Guam Police Department, whether any arrests have been made in the case of the death of 4-year-old Jericho Zion David, whether the traffic investigation has melded instead or has moved on or matured into a death or homicide investigation into Marlene Ewele. Marlene Ewele is the person who allegedly was driving the red Corolla license plate PD4176. Did I get that right, friend? License plate PD4176. Yeah, I'm probably right. That was the car that was seen in video footage striking the child on the road at the cul-de-sac where his house was. The video showing that car at going much greater than the speed limit in that neighborhood, being far enough away within line of sight to that child to see that child and to stop far from that child, and instead hitting the child and causing his death. The driver of the car was Marlene Ewele, and according to neighbors in the cul-de-sac, she hasn't been seen at the house since the incident happened. Now, this raises other concerns, aside from the slow pace, what seems to be the slow pace of this investigation since the autopsy already has been done. And the family members are wondering just as well, because they're anxious for justice. They just buried their little boy. Is Marlene Ewele a flight risk? Is Marlene Ewele on the run? Is she hiding from the law? Is this why police officers haven't been able to arrest her yet? Furthermore, is there a warrant for her arrest? Or are they going to make an arrest based on probable cause, based on the outcome of their investigation? The Guam Police Department is remaining mum on this matter, and it's a cause for concern. I know that last week when we were discussing this story, we did say that we had great faith in the Guam Police Department to conduct a very thorough investigation, but the days are there are quite a few days that have passed since, and we're growing weary of our trust in the justice system, and hopefully we're wrong. Hopefully our anxiety about this is misplaced, and that investigators and police officers are doing everything they can, and we will still remain trusting that GPD is doing everything it can to bring this matter to justice, though we still have not received confirmation on whether a death investigation or a homicide investigation or whatever they're called is now happening as a result of the traffic investigation ending, and whether the Attorney General's office has received this, if this information has been forwarded to the AG for the AG's consideration for an indictment against Marlene Ewele. And then we have to wonder, where is Marlene Ewele? If any of you know where this woman is, please message Candid and let us know, because we would like to ask her some very tough questions. The last part of our show tonight is, the news goes back to the Mount Carmel case. And I mentioned earlier that what I wanted to present to you was a perspective from Jungle Watch that compares the Mount Carmel case with the GW case and also contrasts it. And it's not a very good perspective for the island's Catholic leadership. And give me 1 second, Chalu, and then we can cast to my page. Do you see my screen? Okay, just give me a second to close all this baburius. Hi. Give me a second. Give me a few minutes here. Jungle Watch. All right. Go ahead and cast to my page. If you're not If you don't subscribe, if you haven't subscribed yet to junglewatch.info, or if you haven't seen this page, please do. It's filled with some riveting shit. So this was posted by Frenchie, one of the contributors to Jungle Watch. It's called A Tale of Two Systems. On November 2018, two different, but in many ways, similar incidents occurred. Let me make this bigger. One happened at the George Washington High School, the other took place at the Mount Carmel Catholic Middle School. In both cases, the incidents involved minors having inappropriate relations with adults who should have been trusted with their care and well-being. Without going into the disturbing details, the incidents at George Washington High School resulted in the suicide of two teenagers, while at Mount Carmel Catholic School, the extent of the damage has not reached that level yet. Let's hope it never does. In both cases, the trust that was put in the adults who we suppose have the best interests of our children was betrayed. Yet as of now, the ways both the Department of Education and the Department of Catholic Education have handled both cases are standing in polar opposition. This gets interesting. I've gone along two different articles this week over the very dismal reaction of the Catholic administration in regards to the allegations at Mount Carmel. For those who are interested in more details, you can consult the interviews and interview attempts of several of the actors involved below and judge for yourselves. Watch and listen here, that's one link, and then watch here is another link, and it gives you a timestamp to look at. In contrast to this culture of silence that smacks in total opposition to the very public positions of the Archbishop on the subject of child abuse, the director of the Guam Department of Education has granted interviews where he is as forthcoming as possible and has taken immediate administrative measures to allay the concerns of parents as related to his administration. The contrast could not be more evident between one administration, which clearly is very embarrassed by what led to the suicide of these teenagers, but is willing to investigate, and the other administration returned to the darkest days of the Aperon reign. Why do we have this eerie feeling of deja vu all over again? As I said on many occasions, when Archbishop Burns first arrived on our shores, he benefited of a huge thirst by the faithful for a new era of honesty and leadership. Basically, Catholics at this island had a need for the antithesis of everything Aperon ever stood for. So when Archbishop Burns started meeting many of the Catholic groups from Guam, there was great hope that, as he seemed to listen intently to everyone, that positive change would prevail. One of the suggestions that the Archbishop failed to follow and or act upon was that he enact a clear and definite break with everything related to the old administration. In its stead, he chose to keep many of, for lack of a better explanation, what could be called the deep state of the Aperon machine of corruption. This is how we ended up with the likes of Tony Diaz, Father Jeff, Monsignor James in key positions in his administration. This is why he kept the same assistant that Aperon had, believing honestly that all these actors had seen the light and turned a page for the better. So far, this analysis seems to have erred. Again, I will underline that the task facing him was Herculean at best. The path chosen to deal with these issues was certainly not the wisest. One of the most obvious issues is the lack of any actions in regards to the NCW, or the Neo-Catechumenal Way. I think it's Neo-Catechumenal Way. I watched a couple videos on it last night. The Neo-Catechumenal Way. Beside naming a deacon as vicar to the NCW and a few reassignments of some of their presbyters, nothing positive has happened on that front. One could even argue that the situation on the ground might be even worse than it was upon Aperon's departure. But a whole article about this would be necessary. Surprise of all surprises, it would seem that the NCW is very involved in the alleged cover-up of the Mount Carmel child illegal custody, possible kidnapping, ongoing relationship between an adult named 31-year-old James Bascon and a 12-year-old. I'm choosing not to cover this further until more verified information can be made available. Good luck. One thing seems to be clear. It is that wishing to have a better and different result with the same people that participated in and abetted the Aperon administration turned out to be a foolish endeavor. Let's hope that our leadership will come to terms with this truth. And as a note that Frenchie leaves, I've sent official questions to Tony Diaz for clarifications about the many gray areas in this very disturbing case at Mount Carmel. So far, I have only received a receipt from Tony Diaz that he received my questions. I shall keep you posted if and when the communication office of the Archdiocese finds it agreeable to let us know their side of the story. It should be very revealing of what is and what is not happening at the Chancery. May the Holy Spirit guide Archbishop Burns in the right passage. And then he asks, Saint Michael the Archangel, protect us in battle, Most Holy Apostle St. Jude Thaddeus, friend of Jesus, I place myself in your care at this difficult time. So the Catholic Church seems to be at another crossroads. And it harkens back to a time that some of you may remember, and that was when Archbishop Aperon was in charge of the Catholic Church on Guam. This was back in 2015, and it was following the case of Father Luis Camacho, who was a priest in the South and was caught having sexual relations with a minor in a car. He was arrested, and then he fled island. Hold on one second. I just need to, we're gonna go back to my screen, but I wanna, I need to bring something up first. Yes, save browser, okay. Why don't we go back to my screen? There was a letter written by a guy named Deacon Steve Camacho, and it was rather prophetic for the Catholic Church at the time, and one could argue that if Archbishop Anthony Aperon had followed Deacon Steve Martinez's advice back then, he may still be the Archbishop of Agana. And so, okay, whatever. So he wrote, this was on March 18, 2015, he wrote, Dear Archbishop Aperon, or Anthony, as a continuation to my report on what I had heard earlier today regarding Father Luis Camacho, I remain gravely concerned with a growing pattern of sexual deviancy from RMS-trained priests and seminaries. RMS was that Redemptoris Mater Seminary, the hotel in Jonia. It is my understanding, I just said Jonia, like I'm a fucking Oreo cookie. And I used to live there. I'm Chamorro, okay? I should say it better. Jonia. Fuck it. It is my understanding that the girl whom Father Luis had cunning links with is a member of the NCW and her parents as well. Same thing as this 12-year-old girl from Mount Carmel. It appears that Father Luis used his position of authority as a presbyter of an NCW community to take advantage of this child. This is a grave abuse of trust and a tendency which a proper psychological examination may have disclosed. Unfortunately, this is not the only incident which raises alarm bells about problems within the RMS formation and screening process. I certainly hope the victim's participation in the NCW and that of her parents was not exploited to convince them not to press charges against Father Luis. Prudence would dictate this is a question an independent investigator should follow up on. At a November 2013 Eucharistic Congress at Ipao Beach, Father Argivaldo warned the young girls in attendance about boys. He stated that boys will treat girls like oranges, sucking the sweet juice from them, and when they're all dried up, the boys will spit them out. There are also several disturbing instances where seminaries during public confessions and community disclose personal struggles with chastity and a practice of excessive masturbation. Most recently, during a mass at the Cathedral Basilica, the brother of Father Luis Camacho and RMS seminarian Gabe Camacho boasted to adults and children present, quote, I don't know how many girls I've taken advantage of. I should maybe have 2 children, 3 children, not even with the same woman, unquote. These statements appear to reveal a grave depravity in relations that send warning signals that must thoroughly be investigated by trained and licensed psychologists. In another incident, Dr. or Father John Wadison was allowed to minister to parishes and NCW communities in San Francisco even after the Archdiocese of Agana found out he had credible allegations of sexual abuse leveled against him while he was a priest teaching in Los Angeles. When Father John's record from Los Angeles was publicly revealed in Guam, you allowed Father John Wadison to disappear and you refused to address my concerns about the safety of the public. If Father John is still ministering it to NCW communities elsewhere, all people in that diocese are at risk. Once again, I must ask, does the bishop in the location he currently lives at know that Father John had his faculties removed in Agana, Los Angeles, and San Francisco? Has Father John been allowed to minister to NCW communities there or elsewhere since his departure from Guam. At the height of Archbishop Anthony Apron's power, there was he's not even a priest, he's a deacon, calling him out on his shit and challenging him and asking, did you do these things? Because if you didn't do these things, then we're in a world of shit. Okay, so the letter continues. Your Excellency, proper application of your abuse policy is designed to protect the faithful, yet it appears you have ignored your own policies in several critical areas. You have also failed to implement policy changes regarding conflicts of interest, which now endangers the Archdiocese. Your blatant refusal to address my legitimate efforts to protect the people of Guam and your subsequent action to remove me as your SARC could be construed as dangerous lapses in leadership. What does that say? Which may be exploited by abuse victims wishing to act against the Archdiocese. This is almost like the assistant to the special prosecutor writing a letter to President Donald Trump saying, you need to get your shit together, boy, because everything that you're doing is illegal, and if you don't get it together, it's for the Archdiocese, this is insubordination. Yet Steve Martinez was unafraid, or at least acted with great courage in presenting these reasons and allegations to a very powerful and a very vindictive Archbishop Anthony Apron. Ironically, Dr. Givaldo's demented view of male-female relationships turned out to be blah, 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 blah. That's boring. As I had questioned in my August 27, 2014 letter to you regarding Father John Wadison's situation, if proper and thorough background checks and psychological examinations are not conducted by trained and licensed professionals before a priest is incarnated or ordained into our Archdiocese, then you not only violate your own policy on sex abuse, but you expose the faithful to unnecessary danger from sexual predators and subject the Archdiocese and yourself to great financial liability. Unfortunately, I have yet to receive any response from you to these serious questions in this area. One must now question if your inaction to these matters has been a contributing factor in the abuse of the poor child in Agate yesterday, and will continued inaction result in more cases of sexual misconduct. As a member of the clergy of this Archdiocese, the actions of these sexual deviants cast a terrible shadow on all of us and the entire Catholic Church. Far more important than our collective loss of credibility, however, is the fact that these failures in policy weaken the faith within the Archdiocese. Therefore, as highlighted by the recent sexual abuse by Father Luis Camacho against a child, and because a growing pattern of sexual misconduct appears to originate from within NCW, I once again implore you to address the questions I raised as your SARC nearly 7 months ago. The safety and welfare of many innocent people depends on your impartial and immediate action. I pray you will now take these matters seriously before more innocent lives are destroyed. Should you desire, I remain available at your convenience to discuss these matters further. In Christ, Deacon Stephen W.M. Martinez. So there's a very clear warning to the Archdiocese a long time ago about its lack of integrity in its process and its wanting for stricter adherence to its own policies. And what has happened since? Well, 209 litigants or complainants have come out waging a suit against the Catholic Church. Archbishop Apron was removed by Rome from his position and no longer can hold the scepter or whatever as archbishop. 2 archbishops had to come this way, one being Savio Hontai Phi Lee or something, and the other one is our current archbishop, who's now our permanent archbishop, Michael Burns. And it all started with people who broke their silence and stood up against a very powerful man. This letter was very prophetic, and What Jungle Watch is trying to tell us in its latest writing that was posted just today is that if Archbishop Burns goes down this very same road that Anthony Apparon went down, it's not going to be good for him because people aren't going to trust him. Because why would they want to see more of the same? Why would it require another letter from Deacon Steve Martinez to let Archbishop Burns know what he needs to do in the case of this Mount Carmel student? And why did this even happen to this Mount Carmel student? To begin with, if the church was taking its marching orders from its own policies and with integrity implementing them that way. A lot of unanswered questions from the Archdiocese. Tony Diaz still has not produced any evidence whatsoever that that the reports to GPD and to Child Protective Services were made, as the Archdiocese said they were made, by Mount Carmel School Principal Bill Sarmiento. They cannot even provide a case number for either of those reports or any receipt that those reports were received by GPD or Child Protective Services, which calls into question whether they were just lying about the entire thing. And if they were lying, what are they trying to cover up? Who's involved in the cover-up? Who are the perpetrators? Who and why are people doing this? Were the parents paid anything? Did they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement? Were they threatened? Was the girl threatened? When you get into a level of discussion about the Catholic Church like this, and you go back in its very recent history about its cover-ups, there should be no hesitation to ask these questions and to question the Catholic Church about its own, about the verity, am I saying that right? The veritableness or whatever of its words. It's quite sad. And it is, and the victim in all of it is the victim who was there from the start, and it's that 12-year-old girl. And what's the Archdiocese doing about her? So far, nothing. They said that they did their job when they reported it, though they didn't want to admit that it was child rape or child abuse. They said it was custodial interference. But if it was custodial interference, why did they say that they made a report under the guidelines of the Child Abuse and Criminal Sexual Conduct Against Children Act, the Child Protective Services Act? Because custodial interference doesn't even fall under that act, yet they made reports based on that act. It's ridiculous. So, closing out tonight's newscast, earlier today, when I was at a funeral and I was waiting in the car with Johnny, or Johnny went into the funeral, I was waiting in the car, I talked about my drug addiction and how I was hoping to impart on those of you who struggle with addiction, those of you who know people who struggle with addiction, any kind of addiction, really. And I was talking about how I realized that the drugs never actually made anything go away. They just delayed everything. That I would do drugs to turn off the pain, whatever it was that I was hiding from. And at some point during my sobriety, it just came back. Like it never took a holiday, or like it just took a holiday and just landed right back at my foot. And I would have to face it all. And so that's what I've been doing, and facing my demons. And I think I've become a little bit of a better person because of it. Ready to face it all. Ready to take on the world. Make amends for bad things I've done. Say sorry to people I've hurt. Do right by people. And I'm hoping that those who struggle with addiction hear this message loud and clear. that, hey, you know, I'm not going to judge you for using. If anything, Johnny and I, we understand the struggle. We'll never judge you for using. But whenever it is that you're ready to stop, when the pain comes back, don't grab the pipe, don't grab the needle, write it out, because you actually honestly will never know where it's going to take you. Except, I promise you this, if you write it out long enough, it takes you to a place of healing, to a fixture of your life, and to a realization that there are much better days ahead and that better things are coming. So, is there anything else? Oh no, what are the comments? Hold on, I'm just trying to get this on. It's cramping my style. Motherfucker. Hurry up, god damn it. It's cramping my style. The fuck? No, fuck off. Oh, here we go. So, yeah, you guys have a good night. I don't know what the weather's gonna be like tomorrow. It's probably gonna be hot as fuck. Have a good weekend. I love you all. Oh, if you notice, I didn't smoke any cigarettes. I think I'm gonna quit. Good night.